The morning I found the messages, the sky outside our bedroom window was doing something beautiful. Pink and gold ribbons of light stretched across the horizon, the kind of sunrise that makes you feel like the world is promising you something. I remember standing at the window with my coffee, watching it, thinking that maybe today would be the day I finally finished the deck I'd been building in the backyard. Maybe Priya would come out with her own coffee and lean against me the way she used to, before the baby weight of daily life had pressed us both flat. Then my phone buzzed. A calendar notification I hadn't set. I picked it up and saw her name glowing on the screen. Not Priya's name, but a name I recognized immediately. James Whitfield. The notification read, "Lunch, our usual spot. Don't forget what we talked about." It had synced to my phone by mistake. Priya and I shared a family calendar for appointments and grocery runs and school pickups for our daughter Mia. Somehow, in whatever rush she'd been in, she'd added this to the shared calendar instead of her private one. I stood there for a long time. The sunrise finished its performance and turned into ordinary morning grey. My coffee went cold. I want to tell you, I handled what came next with dignity. I want to say I sat down calmly, thought things through, and approached my wife of 11 years with measured composure. That is not what happened. Priya and I had met in our mid-20s at a mutual friend's dinner party. She was a graphic designer with an infectious laugh and an opinion about everything: food, architecture, the particular shade of blue that traffic signs should be, the moral failings of people who recline airplane seats. I had fallen in love with that certainty of hers. She moved through the world like she owned a small piece of it, and when she turned that energy toward me, I felt chosen in a way I never had before. We married after 3 years together. Mia came along 2 years after that, a wild, red-cheeked baby who grew into a serious 7-year-old who collected rocks and kept a journal she refused to let either of us read. Our life was not glamorous. We lived in a mid-sized house in a mid-sized city, and we both worked too hard and slept too little and sometimes snapped at each other over dishes. But I had believed, with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't think to question the floor beneath his feet, that we were solid. That whatever friction existed between us was the ordinary friction of two people building something together. The calendar notification destroyed that confidence in approximately 4 seconds. I did what every person in that situation tells themselves they won't do. I went looking. I checked her email. She'd stayed logged in on the shared laptop. I checked her texts when she left her phone unattended for 20 minutes while she showered. What I found was not ambiguous. It was not a close friendship that had drifted into inappropriate territory. It was a full, ongoing, deliberate relationship with James Whitfield, who worked at the architecture firm that had redesigned our kitchen 2 years ago. They had been together for 14 months. There were photographs. There were conversations about a future. There was, in one message that I read 3 times, because I couldn't absorb it the first 2, a discussion about whether she was happy enough in her marriage to stay. She had concluded, at least in that conversation, that she was. But the question itself, the clinical, detached way she weighed our marriage against her affair like items on a grocery list, hollowed me out completely. I spent 3 days saying nothing. I went to work. I came home. I helped Mia with her homework. I made dinner twice. I watched Priya move through our house with her usual confident ease, and I tried to understand how the same person who kissed me goodbye each morning could carry something this enormous without any visible weight. On the 4th day, I called my older brother Neil. He was the only person I told. Neil was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to leave," I said. "I want to be done." "Okay," he said. "Then we'll figure out how to do that." I had an appointment scheduled with a family law attorney for a Thursday afternoon. I hadn't told Priya anything yet. I was still composing, in my head, the conversation where I would lay everything out. The messages, the photographs, the 14 months of systematic deception, and tell her that our marriage was over. I rehearsed it constantly, in the shower, during my commute. lying awake at 3 in the morning while she slept beside me, her breathing slow and even and completely undisturbed. What I had not planned for was the Wednesday evening before my appointment. Priya had her friend Carla over for dinner. Carla had been part of Priya's life since college. They were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences and had developed their own private shorthand over 2 decades. I had always liked Carla well enough. She was funny in a sharp, observational way, and she was one of the few people who could make Priya genuinely lose her composure with laughter. I had come home later than expected. Mia was already in bed. I could hear voices from the kitchen, animated, overlapping, the particular cadence of 2 women deep in conversation. I came in through the back door, which opens into a hallway just off the kitchen. The door between the hallway and the kitchen was mostly closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I set my bag down quietly, mostly out of habit, the way you do when a child is sleeping nearby, and I was about to push the door open when I heard my name. "Does Kevin even notice?" Carla was saying. "Like, does he actually see what's happening?" "Kevin?" There was a pause, and then Priya laughed. Not her real laugh, not the one I had fallen in love with. This was something smaller and more dismissive. "Kevin sees what he wants to see. He always has. He's never been particularly perceptive about the things that actually matter." I didn't move. "Still," Carla said, and her voice had a note of something. Caution, maybe, or conscience. 11 years is a long time. He's not a bad person. "No," Priya agreed. "He's not a bad person. He's just... Kevin." Another pause. "You know what his idea of a romantic gesture is? Last anniversary, he surprised me with a reservation at that steakhouse downtown. The same steakhouse we've been going to for 8 years. He was so proud of himself." Her voice shifted into something mimicking tenderness, but hollowed out. "I made us a reservation, Priya. I remembered." Then back to her own voice. "Like the bare minimum deserves a medal." "Some people would be happy with reliable," Carla said, but it sounded half-hearted. "Reliable," Priya said the word like she was tasting something that had gone off. "I spent 11 years being grateful for reliable. James actually sees me. He asks me things Kevin would never think to ask. When was the last time Kevin looked at my work and had something real to say about it? When was the last time he asked me what I was thinking about, not what I needed from the grocery store?" "Priya." "I know how it sounds." "I do. But I have been invisible in this house for years. I didn't go looking for this. I genuinely didn't. But when someone finally makes you feel like a whole person instead of a scheduling coordinator, you understand why people make terrible decisions." There was a silence. Then Carla said, softly, "You should probably figure out what you actually want, before something forces the decision for you." "I know," Priya said. "I know I should." I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My hand was flat against the wall. I was aware, with strange clinical detachment, that my heart was beating very fast. Then I walked back out the way I came in, sat in my car in the driveway, and stared at the garage door for 45 minutes. Here is the thing about overhearing something like that. It changes the architecture of your grief. Before that conversation, I had been in the clean, forward-moving territory of betrayal. My wife had cheated. I had discovered it. I was going to leave. The narrative had a shape, and that shape gave me something to hold on to. I was wronged. I was ending it. I was protecting myself. After that conversation, the narrative became something else entirely, something harder and stranger, and without any clean edges. Because the cruelest thing she had said was not the mockery of the steakhouse anniversary. It was not the dismissive just Kevin tone, though that landed hard enough to bruise. The cruelest thing was that underneath all of it, threaded through the sharpness and the contempt, was something I recognized as pain. She had said, "I have been invisible in this house for years, with the conviction of someone reporting a real experience, not inventing one. And sitting in my car in the dark, I was forced, against every instinct I had, to ask myself whether there was a version of that sentence that was true. I did not want to ask that question. I wanted to stay in the clean territory of her wrongdoing and my exit. I wanted the story to be simple. Husband faithful, wife unfaithful, marriage concluded. The end. But I kept hearing her voice. Reliable, the way she'd said it. Had I been paying attention? Had I, somewhere in the comfortable settling of 11 years, confused stable with present? I thought back over the last few years with the specific, painful clarity that crisis tends to produce. The way I'd started watching television after dinner instead of talking. The way I'd stopped asking about her work. Not out of disinterest, but out of exhaustion, out of the lazy assumption that I already knew what she'd say. The way I'd planned our anniversary dinner at the same restaurant we'd always gone to, and genuinely believed that was enough because it had been enough before. And I hadn't noticed that before had quietly become years ago. None of that excused 14 months of lies. Let me be absolutely clear about that. None of my failures in attention or creativity or presence gave her permission to carry on a secret relationship and look me in the eye every day. Betrayal doesn't get to dress itself up as a reasonable response to neglect. She had options. She could have said the things I'd overheard her say to Carla. She could have said them to me. We could have gone to therapy. She could have asked for a separation. She chose, instead, to let me continue living inside a marriage she had already mentally departed, and that choice was hers, and hers alone. But the question I couldn't put down was different. The question wasn't about who was right or who was wrong. The question was about who we had both been, slowly and without any single dramatic moment, over the last several years. I cancelled the appointment with the attorney. Not permanently. I told myself it was a postponement, a 48-hour extension to think clearly before making permanent decisions. Neil, when I called him, was quiet again for a while. Then he said, "Okay, but Kevin, don't let the fact that you're a thoughtful person become a reason to let yourself be treated badly." "I know," I said. "Do you?" I did, but I also knew something else. That if I left, which I might still do, I needed to leave with full knowledge of what I was leaving. Not just the betrayal. Not just the relief of the clean break. All of it. The full picture of what this marriage had been and how we had each contributed to its collapse. So that I could carry it honestly instead of carrying only the version that made me blameless. I confronted Priya the next evening, after Mia was in bed. I told her about the calendar notification. I told her about the emails and the texts. I told her I'd known for nearly a week. I watched her face cycle through denial. And then, when she understood that denial was pointless, through something that I can only describe as cracking, not theatrical, not performed, but genuinely structural, the way a wall looks when the foundation underneath it has shifted. She admitted everything. She did not make excuses, at least not initially. She sat across from me at the kitchen table where we had eaten 10,000 meals together, and she looked at her own hands and said, "I'm sorry. I know that isn't enough." "It isn't," I said. Then I told her what I'd overheard. That landed differently than I expected. She didn't look defensive. She looked, if anything, worse, more undone. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she said. "Obviously." "Kevin." "Did you mean it?" I asked. "The part about being invisible, did you mean that?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, but I also know I didn't handle it. I know I didn't say any of that to you. I just let it build. And then when something came along that felt like the opposite of invisible, She stopped. There's no way to finish that sentence that doesn't sound like an excuse. "Then don't finish it," I said. "Just tell me whether you want to fix this or whether you want out, because I need to know which conversation we're actually having." We had the conversation about both possibilities. It took most of that night and the better part of several weeks after it. We went to a couples therapist, a direct, no-nonsense man named Dr. Okonkwo, who had the particular gift of not letting either of us be comfortable in our own narrative for very long. He had a way of asking questions that felt like someone removing furniture you'd been hiding behind for years. In those sessions, things came out that should have been said much earlier. Priya talked about the way she'd felt her identity slowly absorbed by the practical architecture of family life, the school schedules and the dinner planning and the management of everyone's needs, while her actual interior life went largely unasked about. She talked about how she'd started to feel like a function in our household rather than a person. I listened to this not as accusation but as report, because Dr. Okonkwo had specifically asked us to try to do that. I talked about my own withdrawal, the way I'd used tiredness as an excuse not to be present, the way I'd assumed continuity in our closeness without doing the work to maintain it. I talked about how I'd spent years being reliable in the ways that required the least of me emotionally, and how I'd told myself that was love when really it was a kind of comfortable coasting. None of this was easy. There were sessions where I left feeling scraped out and furious, where all my original anger at the affair came rushing back, and I sat in the parking lot with my hands on the steering wheel, wondering what I was doing there. There were sessions where Priya sat across from me, with tears moving silently down her face, and I felt simultaneously the old instinct to comfort her, and a colder, harder voice saying, "You do not get to cry about this." Both of those things were true at the same time. That was the hardest part, learning to hold conflicting truths without needing to resolve them into a single clean feeling. She ended things with James completely. I asked her to do it in writing, and she did, and she showed me the message. He did not respond gracefully. That was not my problem. I want to be careful here about what I say next, because I am aware that stories like this one get used as templates. People read them and think, so the lesson is to stay. So the lesson is to forgive. That is not the lesson. The lesson is not universal. I know people for whom the right answer, after a betrayal like this, is to leave. Full stop. No negotiation. No revisiting. I know people who went to therapy and did the work and found that the damage was simply too structural to repair. Those people made the right choice for themselves. What I discovered in the long and uncomfortable months that followed was that my marriage was not one of those cases. Not because the betrayal was smaller than it was. It wasn't. Not because Priya deserved another chance by virtue of our history, or Mia, or any reason that would have obligated me to stay. She didn't deserve it in that sense. Nobody is owed a second chance. But because, when I stripped everything back to the foundation, to the actual question of whether there was something real underneath the damage, I found that there was. I found a woman who had made a catastrophic choice in response to real pain she hadn't known how to voice. I found, uncomfortably, a version of myself who had created some of the conditions for that pain through years of well-meaning inattention. Neither of those things was an excuse for what happened. But together, they formed a picture I could work with, rather than a story that had only one possible ending. There is a moment I return to sometimes. It was about 4 months into therapy, on an ordinary Sunday morning. Mia was in the backyard, examining something she'd found under a rock, her usual serious expression on her face. Priya was sitting at the kitchen table with her sketchbook. She'd started drawing again for the first time in years, and she did it every morning now, protecting that hour the way you protect something fragile and newly returned. I brought her coffee without her asking, and she looked up, and for a second we just looked at each other. Not with the warmth of people who have forgotten what happened, with the specific, clear-eyed warmth of people who have chosen to be in the same room after knowing the worst of each other. That is a different kind of intimacy than the one we had before. It is, in some ways I don't fully have words for, more real. I am not telling you that infidelity is survivable as a general rule. I am telling you that it was survivable for us, and that the moment I thought would end my marriage, not the discovery of the affair, but the overheard conversation in the hallway, the cruel small dismissals, the just Kevin, turned out to be the moment that made saving it possible. Because it forced me to stop seeing myself only as the wronged party and start seeing the marriage as a living thing that two people had both failed to tend with sufficient care. I still think about standing in that hallway, the flat of my hand against the wall, the way her voice sounded when she said reliable, like something you'd describe a kitchen appliance as, not a husband. I think about it, and then I go find Priya and ask her what she's thinking about. Not what we need from the grocery store, what she's thinking about. And she tells me. Every time, she actually tells me. That is not a small thing. After everything, I have learned not to treat it like one. Mia, for her part, knows nothing of any of this. She continues to collect rocks and guard her journal and ask questions at dinner that neither of us can answer satisfactorily, like why the ocean is salty and whether fish experience boredom. We answer as best we can. We sit at the same table where the hardest conversation of my life took place, and we eat together. And sometimes Priya catches my eye across the table with an expression I have learned to read as thank you for still being here. I catch it every time.